And I will call it to order then. First thing I'd like to do is, oops, I'm getting this stuff over my. Colleen, we have two new board members since you last came in, and I just wanted to make visited our meeting, so I wanted to make an introduction in the order in which they were sworn in. First, Bud McDonald joined the board, what, 2 meetings ago, Bud?
Feels like more than that.
Yeah, it's maybe more than that. Time flies.
Sometime last year.
Right. And then right next to him on Hollywood Squares, if you're in the same order as I, is Stacy Farber. If you want to make a brief introduction of yourselves, please feel free.
I guess I'll start. Hi, Colleen. Yeah, this is Bud McDonald. I was a partner at Ernst & Young until June 30 of 2022. So I'm now a retired CPA and have been on the board. I don't know which meeting I started in, but it was probably the middle of 2022, I think.
In the fall sometime, yes.
Maybe fall, fall, September.
My turn. Hi, I'm Stacy Farber. I'm an audit partner at UHY. I have both public and private accounting experience. I have over 20 years of experience. Joined the board late last year. I think I was appointed in November.
Good, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
We have actually a couple of guests today. The first is Colleen Conrad from the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, who will provide us with some updates on some of the, well, we've got so much going on in public accounting right now and changing on supervision and regulations and requirements. And then we also have in our audience several distinguished guests from University of Connecticut, and I'm hoping we'll be able to draw on their expertise when we start talking about item number 2 at a minimum, which I really appreciate availability. But first, if we can go, we start with comments or concerns regarding the meeting agenda, which is usually, we have 2 opportunities for that. The first is to see if there are anything that somebody wants to say before we get into the conversation from our guests and anybody that is sitting in from the public, and then one afterwards before we close up business. So the first, any comments and concerns? Very good. Kat, we don't have anything from the legal division or old business that's come up that I'm aware of, and this is a special meeting, but if we do, please. Is there anything?
Good morning. Yeah, no, there isn't anything today.
Okay. So we'll go to the first of, this should be a fairly, actually very full agenda. If we could, Colleen, I'm going to hand off the floor over to you.
Okay, terrific. First of all, to introduce myself, I am, as John said, I'm Colleen Conrad. I'm Executive VP and Chief Operating Officer at NASBA. And I'm delighted to meet your new members. I know your board turned over, I think this is the board that turned over like all at once a number of years ago, right? And so, and wasn't a lot of turnover after that, but nice to meet some new folks. And Kat had asked me to kind of speak to the items on the agenda. So I'm do this enough that I can pivot as you would like. So I don't know, I believe some of you attended the webinar we had yesterday. And I see some heads nodding there. And that was specific to kind of discussions around pathways to licensure. 120, that there's one state that has some legislation that's being considered to go to 120 for licensure. There's also the proposed amendment that I see, the exposure draft that I see on your agenda here in a little bit later in the agenda. So I can speak to that exposure draft, kind of the NASBA perspective to that. I also see, you know, you have internships in the 150 hours on your agenda. I did not stop to see what your rules say about internships, but I can speak to that briefly about kind of what we're hearing and what we know other states do. And then the 2-year experience requirement for obtaining a certificate, you must have a second year. You have a 2-year requirement in Connecticut, and I can speak briefly to that too. If there's anything else, I know at one point there was a thought that I could give NASBA's kind of feedback to the AICPA, what was called their 8-point plan for pipeline, because this pipeline is the big deal, right? We all know there's so much conversation, so much going on in the profession surrounding pipeline. So it seems like everything ultimately points to that. I don't know if there's anything beyond, you know, specific that you want me to cover. Otherwise, I'll start with the kind of whole 120, 150 conversation that's going on nationally. Does that sound okay?
That would be a good place to start.
Okay. All right. So what we do know is that the Minnesota Society, not the board, the society has started, you know, a discussion about shouldn't there be different pathways to licensure? Because right now, and I'll talk about this in a minute, under substantial equivalency, what allows us, which is what allows the state boards and CPAs and firms to cross borders seamlessly, cross state borders, jurisdictional borders in the United States. That is based on substantial equivalency, and substantial equivalency is based on 3 things. It's pretty simple. The state needs to have 150 credit hours for licensure with a bachelor's degree. Okay. And many states allow candidates to start testing once they have 120 hours, but they cannot get licensed until they have 150 hours of education. And that's the big kind of discussion point right now. The others are everybody has to pass the uniform CPA exam. So that's simple. It's a uniform exam, written and scored by AICPA, administered by Prometric. And the state boards have a lot of voice. We have the state board members have the majority of the seats on the Board of Examiners. So state boards do have a big voice in the constitution of that examination, and definitely in how it's administered. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is 1 year of experience. Okay, so so as a consideration of what states are substantially equivalent, all states are substantially equivalent at this point, which is the beauty and how this profession is looked at nationally and internationally, that we've gotten to where all of the states are substantially equivalent based on those 3 things, which allows CPAs to practice across state lines. But those are minimums. So like in your state, I'm going to speak to the 2-year, if you have a 2-year experience requirement, and I'm not sure you do, but if you do, that's okay. Because we always have said,
I gotta figure out what's going on with that, but I have them in an email I can forward you.
I think somebody needs to mute. I'm not sure who that is. Okay. So historically, we've always said you must meet the minimum requirements of those 3 things: 150 hours, pass the exam, 1 year of experience. Those need to be in the law rules of a state for that state to be deemed substantially equivalent. So that means, and I can look around the room and see that there are some like me that have been around pre-mobility days, right? The days when you had to, I was in Missouri, if I wanted to I had a client in Illinois or Kansas or California or Florida, wherever, I had to get licensed in those states. And depending on the service provided, the firm had to get licensed too, had to get a permit. That's the old days. You know, we're kind of past that, and many of us have forgotten the pain and suffering that was, because you couldn't even hold out. You couldn't even give somebody a card, a potential client or whoever, in a state in which you weren't licensed, which was always a challenge. And by the way, this isn't just physical practice, it's virtual practice. So, and we've gotten so much more virtual since substantial equivalency and the mobility concept was around, that people just have kind of forgotten what life used to be like. Well, what happens is Minnesota has come up with this legislation that says that there should be 3 pathways to become licensed as a CPA. The current pathway, which is the substantially equivalent pathway, 150 hours of education, pass the exam, and 1 year of experience. That is substantially equivalent, check. But they want 2 more pathways, one of which is 120 hours of education plus 2 years of experience. Okay. And the third pathway would be 120 hours of education plus 1 year of experience plus 120 hours of CPE, which is an odd concept because in some ways it's, you know, a state society pushing that someone can get 120 hours to get licensed is kind of ingratiating, you know, it's helping itself. But CPE it's not, the purpose of CPE is not for initial licensure, is to maintain your competencies once you are licensed. But that's what they're proposing, are those three things. If that legislation would happen to pass, Minnesota would be, and in essence, deemed not substantially equivalent. And we can talk about how that works. Each state technically makes that determination, but you do it based on your rules around the substantial equivalency things, right? So if your rules say somebody has to have 150 hours of education to practice to be licensed in your state, and this state only has 120 hours, then you should be deeming that state not substantially equivalent. And what that means is, think of a driver's license. Right now, think of your CPA license as a driver's license. You can just practice everywhere you want to practice. Now, your firm in some states may need to get a permit because firm mobility is not in all states yet. But what this would mean is if a Minnesota CPA wanted to practice, have a client in Connecticut, they would need to get licensed in Connecticut. So it rolls back to the old way of doing things. Now there is some states allow for, I think there's like 28 states that put into rule, there's this division of NASBA called the NASBA Qualification Appraisal Service, that somebody in Minnesota could go to that service and kind of like get the check mark that they meet the substantial equivalency rules to allow them to then easily go to other states. Now, we did that apparently before my time, but I understand that was put in place when mobility was becoming a thing, when all the states were going to 150, because the states didn't want to have to keep track of which states had met the bar of substantial equivalency and which ones hadn't. So they asked NASBA to take on that service, but that doesn't mean people couldn't go straight to a state board for licensure. So that entity, that service is still out there, very lightly used. And frankly, I'm surprised anybody uses it, but some do, because it hasn't been needed, because we had substantial equivalency and mobility. But it is still there and it could be used if needed. So that is one of the big concerns, is a state just choosing to say, we're going to have a new pathways to licensure, because it messes up substantial equivalency for the CPAs and firms in their state and their new, somebody comes in, a candidate gets licensed in Minnesota under that, they're not going to be able to go to other states to practice because they don't meet, the substantial equivalency rules. So it's a concern. What NASBA and AICPA are proponents of is it's worth a conversation. Let's all talk about what the answer should be, but let's do it the way through the Uniform Accountancy Act. Let's get input. Let's expose the idea. If there is going to be some change to pathways to licensure, let's do it uniformly, because that's worked so well for the regulation of the profession to have as much uniformity amongst the states as we can have, because it does help with practice and keep people out of trouble. So that is what we would propose, just like the exposure draft that's outstanding right now on going from 18 months for, the credits last for 18 months to 24 months. It's the same thing. Let's put it out there. Let's have everybody respond and give their input. And then let's say, okay, let's change that portion of UAA, or let's change that rule. And then state boards decide whether you want to do it or not, right? But at least then we have uniform language, and a group has kind of thought through the tripwires and the concerns and the issues and the way it's written. But ultimately, as you know, and I know you have a couple new board members here, but the UAA is not like uniform, the UCC. It's a set of model statutes and rules that state boards can choose to use or not use. So each state then takes it up.
If I can interject for a second here, Colleen, is we actually also have to think in the future, and we've got we assume, or at least I assume, that we'll have lots of changes coming on with the CPA evolution. Connecticut takes the longest amount of time to get a regulation changed, on average 2.5 years. So we often, we have to start thinking about things before the other 49 states and 5 territories if we're actually going to be on track. And so if you can, while you're doing this, talk about, we're talking about the 150-hour rule. Well, the way we think about that and what the requirements are may change quite a bit when you've got a 2-level CPA certificate.
Yeah, that's right. And you're okay for evolution, by the way. Evolution, technically the new exam starts in January of 24. We had 8 jurisdictions that needed to make some changes to statute or rules related to that. One reason we did evolution the way we did was our goal is always to minimize the amount of change that boards have to make. And those states named the sections in their rules. Oklahoma had it in statute, but they've all got that done. So for evolution, you're okay. But then there are kind of asides to that, part of that aren't really about that policy that we asked you to take up and you said okay to last summer. That is a policy, but this the change to the exposure draft that's out there is the biggest thing in it. Is we've always been at 18 months, that once you pass your first section, you have 18 months to pass the remaining 3. And those of you that were on the webcast yesterday heard Stephanie Saunders, our vice chair, talking about this. But the reasoning was, under the paper and pencil exam, back when I took it, you may not remember, but you had 3 years to pass it. You had 6 testing opportunities because you could take it twice a year, right? May and November. So you had 6 opportunities. And by the way, in the old days, in most states, you had to pass all parts at one sitting, right? Any unpassed part, and you had to condition, and there was, all sorts of bells and whistles around that. So when we computerized, candidates could then test quarterly, so they could test 4 times a year. So to have parity and say 6 times testing, we said you could test 18 months. So 4 quarters, and then 2 more quarters. So that's 6 quarters. So you could test 6 times over 8, and that was an 18-month period. Well, when we went to continuous testing a few years ago, candidates, once they weren't limited to testing once per quarter. Once they got their score, if they failed, they could reapply and test again quickly. That is what we call continuous testing. So we already went to candidates having the ability to test instead of just 6 times to at least 12, and some had found ways, if they really worked it right, to test even 3 times in a quarter. Now, not a big percentage take advantage of that. It's in single-digit percentages that do that, but it is available for them. So there was already more leniency given to what we call the 18-month rule. But what's happened is there's been this movement to, because of pipeline and because of how busy firms are keeping their employees, their staff, to say, well, maybe let's give them 2 full years to be able to test. Let's go from 18 to 24 months as a nod to giving them a little relief in how long that they have to take the exam. But at the same time, I will tell you, having been around the exam for a long time, and human nature is to procrastinate for most people, right? So what they do is they have 18, they pass a part, and then they wait until, till the very end of every point in time that they can test. We know that they do. We see it. We see the testing patterns. We know it happens. We also know, and I think there's at least one educator in the group here, and I know there's some listening in, that when you talk to professors, they will say, we always encourage our students to get in there and test and get it done. And the numbers kind of prove it out. We know that the pass rate, the percentage of that pass by age at time of exam, we don't have the very specific information, but we know as a proxy that if many people take it right out of university. So those under the age of 22 in the year of 22, 66.3% passed. The pass rate was 66.3% of them passing. When you go to 24 to 25, so you go 3 years out, it goes down to 51%, I'm sorry. In 21, so it went down 15 points over the course of going to 3 years. In 21, it went down 20 points. 71% passed at the age of 22 and lower. And by the time you get to 24 and 25, only 51% do. So we know you're doing them a disservice by giving them a lot of time. They need to be, you say they're going to be a professional. They need to have, the discipline to get in there and get it done. And because what happens is life gets in the way, is the way I say it. They start working and get busy, and then it's hard to study. They get married, they have kids, just things start happening in their life, and they get out of the mode of studying and testing. You get away from school and you don't want to go back to that, right? I don't. So we know that it is not advantageous in the long run for the candidate to give them a lot of time, even though every one of them would say, give me a lot of time. What ends up happening is they get discouraged and walking away. It is helpful for the firms, because the firms can say, hey, put off taking that exam section, go work on this client, go work on this one. But to wait too long, we don't think is good. And by the way, the 18 months was around in periods when pipeline was flourishing and when it's going down. So it's not a differentiator. It's just been the way it's been. But our board is supportive of going to 24 months. And we do know some state societies are encouraging 36 months. We think that these numbers that I just said is kind of one reason that you start getting to 36 months, you're starting to get quite a ways out. So and by the way, AICPA's leadership is supportive of 24 months too. So that's kind of the spin on that part of the exposure draft. There are two other things in the exposure draft. One is, and I don't know where Connecticut is on this, but it's again relief for candidates by saying when does the 18 months start? Does it start when they sit for a section of the exam that they ultimately get the score on and pass? Or does it start at the end of the month? Many boards right now say it starts when they sit. But we know in 2024, there's going to be some delays in score releases because of the conversion over to the new disciplines and the new exam sections. So the recommendation actually was put out last fall in an exposure draft, left in the exposure draft now is for boards to consider starting the 18 months when the candidate gets their score, when NASBA releases the score. Some places we release it to the state and then the state releases it like the 24 hours later. Many states have us just release the score to where candidates can see it. And then the last thing is, what do you give credit extensions for? There's a little bit of additional language added there to kind of give some clarity. Most state boards have rules that say something like something outside of the control of the candidate, a death in the family, they're sick, they've been deployed, something like that. And you take them up one by one, case by case. No suggestion to change that particularly, but there was a little more clarity added for consideration of the states. So that is the proposed amendments to UAA Rule 5-7 that you're going to talk about. I'm going to speak briefly about internships and 150 hours. I already talked about 150 hours. Internships, the UAA, I believe, took it up to 6 hours or 9 hours of internships. So if you looked at the model rules, it used to be 3 hours of accounting and 3 hours of business. And I think they took it up to increase it to 9. I will say that state boards are all over the place on internships. Some don't limit internships. So, but I will also say, and the educators would probably back me up here in saying there's not enough time in their schedule to do more than a couple internships usually. By the time they get all the courses in that they need to take, to do, 2 internships would be typical, maybe after their junior year and after their senior year, or within. But some states will say 12. Some states, like I said, don't have any limitation on internships, and others have it more strict. They've left it at 3 and 3. So when you take that up, that's something for consideration. Some would say that's a pathway. That could be a new pathway, is allow for 30 hours of internship. And so in essence, it's going to be on a transcript. So it'll count towards 150 hours, but it would be internship hours. We have a program called the ELE program that those of you that were on the webcast yesterday heard some about, which is a way for students to get their bachelor's degree and then start working at a firm as an employee and finish out, whatever. Many students don't need 30 hours. They just in getting their undergraduate, they have more than 120, but it would be up to 30 hours of affordable online coursework, but it would be coursework that we know the firms think is valuable, that it would be things that in talking to firms, what they wish their new hires had more education in. And it could be even things like communication or data analytics. It's not going to be the accounting hours, because the accounting hours needed to come with the bachelor's degree. but it would be very affordable. So somebody that can't afford to go on and get a master's degree or just stay in getting their education could start working, could finish out their education while they're working, while have benefits, and get it in an affordable fashion, something along the lines of what it might cost for community college hours. But they would be undergraduate. So
Are there any states that put any restrictions on what those extra 30 hours can be? Because I know one of the reasons why the 150-hour rule is intensely disliked is that it just says, okay, get another 30 hours for whatever. It's just an extra expense, it's extra time. It's an extra burden that seems to do not much more other than restrict supply.
what it does do though, John, is it helps those who, and we see Rick Reisig yesterday on the webinar talked to like 4 or 5 of the employees in his firm, which is a regional firm. And only one of them came through with an accounting major. They came down other paths. So say somebody has an engineering degree, the 30 hours lets them get their accounting and business hours in the 30 hours. So
Well,
if you
understood, and those are specific circumstances. And I remember there were time. Well, yeah, I'm showing my age here when the old Dwight Haskins would have programs for liberal arts majors that could pick up their accounting afterwards. And it always worked very well, but as soon as the pipeline filled up, they always dropped it. No, being a big supporter of education, I think, extra hours in English would help. Philosophy certainly would help because it's critical thinking. But when we had a regional meeting, we had one of our, guy from New Jersey said his very best hire was taking courses in film studies. Why? Because you're working me a hard year and I've got to do something. I've got to get through these extra 30 hours and I'm going to do it in the way that's going to be easiest. That's not helpful.
I will, I hear you, and we hear about underwater basket weaving, right? You hear about people doing that. Does it happen?
That's a term from the 70s, yes.
Yeah, so I get it. I will say when we talk to, like, we have CPACE, which back offices many of the state boards reviewing transcripts and applications for the exam, and we do it for licensure too. You talk to those folks and you don't get a lot of that. I mean, you hear the story here and there, but you really don't get a lot of that because of the nature of how students go about getting,
Right.
and what they do. There's a lot of dual majoring going on. So to be able to dual major, accounting and data analytics or this or that. So there's people are going at it. And then there's a lot of them that by dual majoring, they get more hours even in the 4 years, not even having to wait the 5th year.
Yeah, I agree. And you hope your professionals will do that.
Yeah.
But the fact is that there's no requirement. If anybody actually anywhere ever offered underwater basket weaving, you could take that.
Did you, and I don't know if you saw, but Rick Reisig, he had like a blog, our chair right now, put out a blog in the last week or two. And I know it went to all state board members, and Kat got it too. If you want me to forward it to you again, I can. But he kind of, in that blog, talks about the history, about why the profession went to 150. And a lot of it was driven by the Big Four. Frankly, there were studies saying that, one, to make it, more of a profession, not just a 4-year degree trade, but also they were saying we need them to be more well-rounded in things like, we still hear in communications, in business acumen, in other things, that when they're coming out, these are some of the things that we need. And so they didn't want to limit it to. And by the way, there was a push at one point to try and put a lot of specificity into the 30 hours too. And it crashed and burned.
You know,
One,
yeah, I understand.
academia doesn't like it because they don't like being told prescriptively what their curriculum needs to be. So there was pushback from there too.
I understand it, but we are in a unique position here where we will have a 2-level and maybe some thought. I don't know whether any thought is going into that. And I do remember, okay, a long time ago in the 90s, I recommended that maybe we should have a required course in English as a first language as a joke, and I got a very positive response.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's there. What I think is great is there is a lot of discussion right now. I mean, by Minnesota doing what they did, it is bringing the conversation to the table. And to say the other challenge with dropping back from 150 to 120 is the anti-regulatory environment. The anti-regulator folks, and there's a lot of them out there, are saying they're pushing to say we shouldn't regulate. One, and they sweep accounting CPA licenses into it, and engineers and architects and others, to say you don't, buyer beware, don't license people, just let those using the service determine if they want to use that person or not, which we think is dangerous. We think CPAs provide a very valuable service, and by backing off on the education, you're in essence giving them more ammunition to say, yeah, well, they're even admitting to it now. So that's not helpful either.
Agreed.
But I think
I wasn't recommending backing off. I just recommending change from the whatever your 30 hours is. Stacy?
I just wanted to jump in on that point because, I feel like accounting is a little bit different than some of these other professions because, to John's point about the education piece, there's no value add there. I understand there may be some people that didn't major in accounting, but isn't that part of the process they go through to meet their eligibility to have the specific core requirements? It doesn't add any value having the extra education. To me, being in this profession and seeing what I'm seeing right now, the experience is way more important and way more critical and is more helpful to these students to pass the exam than taking sports nutrition, whatever classes they're taking, because I've had people working for me that they're not taking any accounting classes. They're taking, like John said, the easiest, the cheapest, and the quickest, and adds no value. It absolutely adds no value. And, if I had control over this whole thing, I would say get rid of the education requirement and put back the 2 to 3 year work experience, because I'm not gonna trust, if I was a company, I would not trust somebody with 1 year of experience as a CPA over somebody with 3 years of experience in a CPA. Somebody with 1 year of experience still knows nothing. And having your 30 hours of extra schooling, not in accounting, doesn't make you any smarter, more advanced, more of an expert. I just, that's my opinion, that based on what I'm seeing and based on what I've lived with through my career, I don't have an extra 30 hours and I'm a partner. I didn't need it. Passing the exam is the key there, and having the experience. I just really strongly disagree with it.
So I remember I needed 3 years of experience, which we called the 3-year Slave Labor Act, because all the
Yeah.
wages, all the salaries were depressed until you passed that 3 years. But
So,
no,
yeah,
I'm not
well-
quite as open. I really am, would support, and I'm glad we've got professionals from the university on, because I think they can add a lot to this discussion later. I just think that it needs to be thought through. But I understand the difficulties here, because there is I mean, let the free market sort it out after you've got 10,000 audit failures is not quite the way to go. And there's a protection of the public here, which can be addressed by quality education requirements. So
Yeah.
I'll shut up and let you finish.
No, no, I think I've spoke to most everything that you asked me to speak to. The 2-year experience requirement, I'll take you down memory lane there too. The old 2-year experience or 3-year experience was in public, you had to work in public accounting. And when the decision by the powers that be at the time to go to 150, the decision was to take it back to 1 year of experience. And it's a much broader 1 year of experience in most states. If you look at UAA, it is something in accounting or finance or consulting. I always kind of say you can be counting coins in the back of the bowling alley and that can meet your experience requirement. It's very much watered down from what it used to be, which, by the way, in Minnesota, that is their requirement, is the watered down version. And they've gone to 2 years. So this would go to 2 years of the watered down version, as opposed to the old days when it was 120 plus 2 years of public accounting experience. Now, that decision was a nod to business and industry, right? It was a nod to that not everybody goes into public accounting and that they can go, you think go into corporate America or into a bank or government, internal audit, whatever. That's what people think of, but it doesn't, the way that it's been written, it's very loose. So that, I think, when you look at some states say you have to have 1 year of experience, but if you're going to do audits, you have to have had a year, the second year has to have audit in it. But to be true to UAA, you would go to the UAA experience requirement, which is fairly loose. So I think I wanted to share that, the history of the 2 years experience. And I believe too, going to 150, I think there were those that were very much proponents of saying you had to have a master's. It's not just a bachelor's plus 30, it was a master's, but it couldn't, they couldn't politically get it to happen because there were a lot of the academic world spoke up, and there were a lot of universities that didn't have master's programs. And so they were not in favor of going to that. Now we've gotten to where some universities more and more have MAC programs or, the ability to get a master's, but it was a hard fight to get to the 150. And there was a settlement on the 120 plus 30, but a certain number of accounting and business hours. I don't think if there's something you want me to speak to, I'm happy to do it. But I don't know how much time you have allotted or what else you're covering.
Whoop.
Is there an issue?
No, I just lost my screen for a second there.
Oh,
got to find it again. Nope, not there. Nope. Where is that?
John, while you're looking for your screen, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
At the NASPA meeting, there was talk about the pilot program for ELE and the timing in terms of when you're hoping to start that. Could you share that information with the rest of the group here today, please?
Sure.
And with that too,
Bingo.
if we were a state that wanted to participate, when would we have to think about whatever it is we need to do?
A state or a university?
University, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. So the ELE program is Experience, Learn, and Earn. In early iterations, we've mentioned it at annual. It probably had a different name. there was back and forth about what to call it, and this is where it landed. So ELE is what we call it. This is, I kind of alluded to this. It's a structured experience following a bachelor's degree. So it's like an alternative way to get to the 150 and licensure while getting meaningful academic credit and early work, going ahead, you know, as Stacy, as you said, starting to work. So the principle is that it would be through firms that agree to the parameters of the program. And by the way, it's still in the baking stage. You know, we're getting ready to do a pilot that will start next fall. And what would happen is if a firm agrees to follow the parameters of the program, they could either say they have employees now that aren't CPAs that want to go on and get the 30 hours to you know, that they have the accounting hours, but they need to round out the rest of the hours. They could either use this as a way to hire people, new hires, or take people that are currently in the firm, and they would agree to. So as I said, many students don't need 30 hours, but say somebody only had exactly 120 hours and they need to finish out the 30. So it would be up to 30 hours. So they could be working at the firm and at the same time finishing their education through these cost-effective courses that will be robust through accredited university. And it will be the kinds of things that we've heard firms want. So the timing is there will be an email, I believe, going out to the firms, you know, like the big the major firm group, the G400 of AICPA. So some of the biggest firms, all the way down to the little ones, telling them about the program. That email should probably be going out next week, and asking their interest in such a program. It's not sign on the dotted line. It's your interest. How many, you know, employees might you think you might want to put into a program like this? We're working with one particular university now, but the intent is to have a lot of universities included in this program across the country. Small, you know, private, public, community colleges, HBCUs, big state schools, whatever, to sign on to the program. And after the pilot we think will be a year. But what we'll probably be doing would be putting out an RFP to universities, Bonnie, later this spring.
Thank you.
For them to see the nature of the program and consider, and then respond back that they would be interested to then participate. And the timing's not exact, but probably next summer or fall, not this summer, you know, because we plan to start it this fall.
Yeah,
So,
I think you'd find a lot of interest in that, and that's one of
Yeah.
the things I think we're interested in. I understand there's a big limitation of that because, I mean, how far can universities stretch to integrate and cover these things?
well, it would be using some of their existing coursework, probably. You know, and it may not be in the accounting program. It may be it may be English. You know, could be other things, writing, business writing, could be other things too.
Well,
And what it does is it allows the firm with the individual to say what courses, you know, kind of work together to say what courses do we think will help you both best succeed at our firm too.
Apparently, one of the biggest intakes of the big financial firms, investment banks, is philosophy students.
Yeah.
Critical thinking.
That's right. A lot of people like to hire liberal arts majors and then teach them things. That's becoming more of a thing. I will speak briefly. You know, I think, John, you mentioned that somebody from New Jersey talking about a program there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that program, that's PwC with St. Peter's University. It's kind of a pilot too, I would say. And I think they had like 6 people go through. It was kind of a diversity initiative, and what their program is 10 3-hour courses that PwC worked with the university and said, this is what we want them to learn, and they're experiential. So it is, a lot of it is working at the firm and checking off that I've done these things, I understand. Of like the learning objectives are done through PwC, but it's also being fully funded by PwC, so it's not scalable. But this program, to be part of, one, it's not saying that the firm has to pay for the education. It's not saying how much the firm has to pay the employee or how they allow them the time to get do the coursework. That has to be worked out between the firm and the employee, but they do have to allow them time. So it may not be full-time. It may be part-time, but hopefully part-time enough that they're getting benefits too. So there's a lot of latitude on the firm side, but I do know many of the firms that we talk to, the larger firms, are saying, well, it's so reasonably priced that we would probably just pay for it. But even if not, if it's a smaller firm that can't afford to pay for it, just bringing somebody in, it allows them to compete, a smaller firm to compete by having something to offer people to get them in the door to work, which has been appealing to some too. Does that help, Bonnie?
Yes, thank you. Just for clarification, you're looking to run the pilot program this fall, but open it up if everything works out next summer or fall.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
I just came from a meeting when we were talking about timeline of putting out an RFP, which will be this spring before the semester's out. So universities can at least see it and administrators can contemplate it. You know, I don't know how long the RFP period will be, but we want to get it out to other universities too, because very much want to, work out kinks with a pilot, but then put it into motion.
Thank you. You're muted,
you're on
John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question? I've wasted too much time. I'm not going to ask anymore.
I have one
Okay.
more, if nobody else is raising their hand for a second. In terms of the mobility issue, you said that those were the three factors, being the 150 hours, the have at least 1 year experience, and the pass the exam. Those are the three things that are looked to determine substantial equivalency.
That's right.
So if someone made any other tweaks, and we're not looking to do this, we just did the changes to our regulations so that we would be in line with CPA evolution. But where they want to make any other tweaks to either classes or anything else related to taking a test or exemptions for tests, waivers, etc., that should not impact equivalency. But
Are
we
you
need
talking
to
about
stay.
waivers for the CPA exam? Or
No, I shouldn't have said waivers. I should have said extensions. So if we wanted to well, let's go to what you were talking about before. You put forward 24 months, but there was a great deal of debate whether 24 was the right number at the last meeting. Some people asked for unlimited, and we are not asking for unlimited, but the response was, we're talking about it. It can be anywhere between, 24 and whatever. It's a discussion, and the AICPA said that that's a guide. So if we were to go to, we're not looking to go to 48 months either, but if we were looking to increase that testing period beyond the 24 months, that should not take us out of equivalency.
it will not impact substantial equivalency, but let me give you a caveat to that. That's 100%. It doesn't affect substantial equivalency. Full stop. But I will say, in talking to executive directors, because we also have this amnesty program that I didn't even get into here under consideration. There is some that would say, gosh, because think of the old days when California, there were certain states that let you cherry pick the exam, meaning but that was the terminology of the day. Most states, when you started, you had to take all 4 parts, right? And then you had to pass at least 2 and get at least 50% on the other 2. And so there was a very rigid way under paper and pencil that you went through the examination, and you always had to take up any parts you hadn't passed, etc. There were some states even then that would say, California lets you take a part at a time. Because of that, we're not going to accept that in our state for licensure. Okay. So there are some states that could rattle their chains and say that we don't think it's uniform enough for you to say that you can have 5 years to pass all 4 parts. So if the challenge is this, and everybody gets confused about this, but so say I'm in Connecticut, you say it's 5 years. And so I take the 5 years, I pass the exam, and I immediately want to move to New York and get licensed. New York may say you didn't meet the requirements for the exam in our state, so we're not going to license you. That doesn't mean we NASBA would agree with that, but states do take it up and have that conversation. Now, but if you in Connecticut worked, 5 or 6 years and then wanted to get licensed in New York, they would probably let you in under reciprocity. So there's a little bit of a, push-pull there. But I say it doesn't affect substantial equivalency, but it is a point of conversation amongst the executive directors and probably with them and their state boards as they look at letting people in for licensure, rightly or wrongly.
Thank you. I did send a letter to the state board members where I did mention the amnesty program. So just if any state board members want to know more about it, it was in my very last bullet. I did not include a lot of information because I did not have a lot available to me, but Colleen is the one that has that information if you're looking for more now.
Yeah.
So if you were planning on asking me a lot of questions around that, I would strongly encourage you to ask Colleen while you have her in the meeting.
I just don't want to, I don't know how much time you have allowed, and I feel like I've taken a lot already. So I'm happy to give you a Reader's Digest. There's this idea under consideration if you'd like, but.
I would like to hear that because, I wasn't clear on what that last bullet was, Bonnie. So thank you.
Okay. So there's this idea. Yeah. There's this concept and idea floating around, which is kind of tied to COVID, but just bear with me here. The thought was back in early 2020, when everything shut down, our world changed. Prometric actually shut down for a month and a half, and that's all. But when they came back online, they had social distancing, so they went down to 50-60% capacity for a bit. And then they realized because of the cubicle walls that they could go to full capacity, but that took 3-4 months. And they required masks in the test centers for quite a long time. They're now back to kind of status quo, but there was that going on in the testing world. But then there's this also kind of folks who, and the example I give is a real example of somebody who was a new employee at Deloitte, and he decided, life's short, right? He was seeing what was happening in the world. I want to do something different. I want to be a comedy writer. So he bought a van, converted it, went out and saw the world, writing comedy, made his way to LA. Now things are changing, right? And then there's the folks who went into investment banking or went to work for Amazon or Google or whoever, and they're losing jobs now. So we know when economies turn, people tend to come back to accounting because it's a solid profession, and getting a CPA can be a game changer. So the thought was, we know that between 2021 and 22, more than 18,000 people passed a part, and I can give you the numbers, 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts of the exam, and then walked away. Now, 1 part is more understandable because maybe they did their best one first and then they couldn't pass the others. So maybe they shouldn't be a CPA. But others, for some reason, chose to walk away from their exam journey. So the thought was, what if we invited them back? What if we, and pardon my term, I'm going to use reinstated because that tends to put off bells and whistles. But what if we said people that had lost parts from this date to this date, we're going to reinstate your credit and give you until this date to pass the remaining parts. So in essence, because of the pipeline issue, inviting them back in to restart their testing journey and finish it out. That is the idea. It's gotten legs. It's been popular we've shared it with State Society folks and our those that attended the ED conference. I will say the executive directors tend to be the ones that say, oh, I don't know how we do this. The AICPA is supportive. Our board is supportive of learning more. So we have convened a task force to kind of kick the tires and say, what are the roadblocks? What would be the issues in doing this? And so that's where we are now. There's no, yes, we're going to do it. No, we're not. This is an idea. If we're going to act on it, we need to move swiftly. But we're trying to figure out how it could work. What kind of, would it require rule changes? As you say, Connecticut, that's a challenge for you. How much could you do under existing rule? Like, you know, states did find ways to extend credits during COVID. Some would say, well, gosh, you already extended credits during COVID, so why do more? This is kind of a different, you know, to some extent, a different group, because these are the ones who walked away. But I don't think you can just offer it to them. You would have to offer it to those that were still trying to test and losing parts. So conceivably, if you did something like this, and each state would have to take it up and decide if they wanted to do it or not. But you could conceivably have somebody who's just been having trouble with a certain section, you know, they've lost a section, just again, maybe they procrastinated, whatever, but they've struggled to get all 4 parts within the 18-month period. What if we said, okay, we're going to give those credits to you, finish out that one. Some of them, if you give them a credit back, may be done, and they may be able to move right to licensure. So it would have an immediate impact on pipeline. This is a short-term, one-time idea. This isn't a long-term pipeline for the future kind of a thing. So that's the idea, and it's being considered.
Thank you.
What do you think?
John,
Ideas?
you're muted.
Reactions?
I see you talking, John.
Yeah.
I just want to let, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thanks. The mute's in a different place on this than I'm used to. Thank you very much. If you'd like to stay, you're very welcome. If you'd like to get back onto your real job, we won't keep you any longer.
What I may do is just listen in for a bit. I'll go off screen, and I may have to go here for another meeting in a bit, but I may just listen in for a bit if that's all right. Okay,
thank you. I would like to then move on to the number 2, which is internships. And, you know, is there a way, or should we be looking for programs that we could work with so that you get the experience and tied into an academic program and courses? And we do have, I think, 2 people from Carla, would you like to introduce your colleagues?
Sure. Oh, wait. Okay, I'm unmuted. You're right, the button's in a different place. George Plasko is the head of the University of Connecticut School of Business Accounting. department and very well known in his field, and has been doing a lot of work about the pipeline issue and coming at it obviously from the standpoint of academic institutions, and he can discuss more about that. And Aaron Lee is the person within the UConn School of Business accounting department who works constantly on various aspects of the 150-hour requirement and all the ancillary issues and activities that go along with that.
Are there particular comments you'd like? Let me give a 30-second overview just in terms of the view that I come from and where I come from, if that would be helpful to place this in context. Because obviously everything you've heard
Please.
about here is from a national, sort of a global perspective. And when you look at the number of institutions which supply accounting graduates, there's a broad range of universities and schools that do that. UConn is nationally targeted by all of the major firms across the country, which is not necessarily the case for a lot of other universities. So, in that regard, we may not be the average department when it comes to all of those around the country, but certainly we are when we look at our national peers. Being in that position, I have a lot of contact with my contemporaries, my counterparts across the country, so that if something is happening nationally versus something happening locally, I think I have a sense of getting that perspective. Erin is really the person who's the most important person in our department when it comes to our students. She is the sole funnel and the point person between all of our students and then making connections for leadership programs and internships and career advice with the students. And she's also the sole point person from all of the firms who want to come to UConn in order to interview. So if anything happens, if anything's going on, she gets the call if I don't get the call. And by and large, if they actually want to solve a problem, they'll go to her first because she'll deal with it. She can talk, and so she's heavily involved in the internships. I have one note here. I'm just to go back over the discussion of the 150 and the education requirements. I don't want to use this as a soapbox having to deal with CPA evolution. We could do a whole nother meeting on that and the way universities responded. But I would want to make one observation about the role of 150 and education beyond 120 and the new CPA exam. When CPA evolution was revealed to academics, and I was the president of the American Taxation Association, which is part of the American Accounting Association when that happened. There were significant seminars like this. It was made abundantly clear that while you might be able to sit for the CPA exam after 120, you will not likely be able to pass some of the sections. Right. So we can say we can take the exam after 120, but you're not going to cover, for example, tax in that 120. So if somebody just takes 120, does 30 hours of above or underwater basket weaving, they won't be able to do the tax section. The CPA evolution is sort of pushing back against the idea of what these other 30 credits are. And we as an institution, I know other institutions across the country, regardless of what you see on transcripts, we do as much as we can to provide the students with advice to say, yeah, this course might sound harder, but it's really going to help you in the long run. With that, just in terms of that one comment on how 120 and 150 may play into this, and I'm happy to meet one-on-one with anybody who wants to talk about any of these other issues. Let me turn it over to Erin in terms of some of the questions related to internships. Are there? But I guess I would ask, are there specific issues related to that you'd like her to talk about, or Erin, do you want to just sort of give a brief overview of our program?
I'm happy to do either, answer questions or give an overview. I mean, to give a little context, right, like George said, we are one university. There's tons of different types of universities within the state alone. We have an internship for credit program over the summer. Students can get 6 credits through this class. Last year we had about 19 students get credit, and it's consistently dropped kind of with the enrollment trend that we've had. I can't give you numbers for this summer yet because students are still kind of enrolling, but I anticipate it to be around 20 or less. So the number of students that you're impacting, at least from UConn, is not a huge bubble, if you will.
And I will quickly add again that, along with the national decline in the number of accounting majors, we are not, that's been a range. There are some schools that have had minimal impact. There are some that have been absolutely devastated in terms of their enrollments. I would say we're in the middle here at UConn. We haven't taken nearly as big a hit as a lot of other schools, but we've taken a substantial hit. If you go back 5 or so years, and Erin can correct me because she keeps this, we went from maybe 140 students graduating at 120 credits with an accounting degree. And I'm guessing this year we're in the 90 to maybe 100 range. So we're down significantly. We're doing all we can in order to be able to help deal with those pipeline issues. But again, it could be a conversation for another day because some of that takes place before they get to a college campus.
Erin, did you say that the number of students picking up on the internship credit program or summer program has gone down significantly?
Yeah, from the numbers that I have. It's not that students are not doing internships, they are all doing internships. They are just opting not to do them for credit.
And if more students would be interested, would the thing holding the numbers down, would that be the bandwidth of the university to do that extra thing, or would it be actually the firm's side on the internships?
In terms of how many students we can
how many seats possibly there would be, or opportunities? Would there be a limiting factor?
Limit it, right, George?
No,
there is a big limiting factor then.
No, yeah, the limiting factor, as Erin said, it's 2 things. It's one, the number of students. If the same percentage of students do internships and we have a smaller number of students, the number of interns go down. The other issue, as Erin highlighted, is to go back, is to get the internship credit requires writing a check. And some of the students will, if they can get to 120 or 150 without writing a check, even though it's a very reduced credit rate in the summer, but if they can get there without writing that check.
Understood.
Yeah, they'll do that.
Understood. Yeah. I'll keep out of comments on what you need to do to prepare for the exam because I passed in 1976. It's very much a book exam then, and I don't suppose it's at all similar now.
No. I mean, one of the things, and again, overall internships versus registered internships, the students certainly understand the value of the internships. They're going to come back to campus with an offer in hand. It's just from our point of view, it's the dichotomy between, it's not just the internship, but whether they want that additional credit. They're getting the same experience either way.
If I were a student going into public accounting and I came to either of you for advice on what to take, I think I'd get advice to get some high-end tax courses from you, I think. But would there be any non-accounting courses that you would recommend as possibilities?
Erin does this all the time. I know what she's going to say, so I'm going to let her say it.
Yeah, so a big part of what I do for the students is what I call 150 planning, right? And I tell them there's no right or wrong way to get 150 within the rules. There's a right and wrong way for every student, right? Like George said, we have students that they can afford $4,000 internship course this summer, and there's other students that can't. So what I recommend they do is really specific to their situation. Right, we have about 1/3 of our students are going down the master's route, so if they're going to get those upper level accounting credits that they need and likely should be taking. And then there's some students that they came in with an absurd number of AP and ACE, right? And that's a UConn bubble thing. That's not necessarily every school. They came in with an absurd number of credits, so they want to get in the working door quickly, so they don't necessarily go the master's route, although we're trying to finagle something, help them down that route. So it really is dependent on the student. The analytics minor is becoming and is very popular for our students. I personally always tell them to take public speaking. Whether they do is on them, very unlikely. But I don't really prescribe specific classes. It's more of putting the puzzle together that best suits their financial situation, their timeline, and really what they're looking for.
And we do offer certificates separate from within the master's program. Someone could do a one-off certificate in, for example, analytics. We're developing one in tax to help students who either want to do the MSA with a concentration in tax, or just wanted, or somebody at UConn who just wants to have it on their resume that they've done tax. It may be somebody from another school where that school doesn't have the curriculum they need in order to, let's say, sit for the tax section. If they don't need the master's, they can take the 4 courses they need in order to both get a certificate and be prepared for the CPA exam. So those are some of the things we're looking at.
So except for the additional cost, which is less than it would be for a regular year, there's no impediment right now for, and I would presume that would be also for a non-UConn student, somebody who graduated who wanted to take advantage of it?
Yeah, the certificate programs that as we offer them are open to anyone. Okay. You don't have to be a UConn student. And we also have a certificate program, which is a path for non-accounting undergraduates to transition into our master's program and to become CPA exam and meet the state requirements. The other quick thing that Aaron highlighted, and since I talked fast, I'll squeeze it in here. We also have an accelerated master's program we've developed because we have such a significant chunk of students who are doing 150 and 4. But again, we also saw that those 30 didn't necessarily fit into what we thought was a complementary bucket. We've got a way now so that those students can start their master's program while an undergrad. They could get 40% of the master's degree done as part of their undergraduate tuition before they graduate. The idea is, rather than graduate in May with 150 credits, graduate early, graduate in December, and we'll roll you right into our master's program. And then you will have had 4 of 10 courses completed come January 1st. And you can finish your master's in our spring and then summer semester, take courses that complement what you're studying for the CPA exam. And a key driver that helped us design that, and I assume everybody here from the firms will appreciate this, you don't have to push off your start date. That is, you could have your master's in 4 years plus 1 semester, and still start and start that first day of employment as if you did 150 and 4.
Can I just add, George, I believe a number, if not all of the courses above the regular 120 are online, so that you don't have to wait till a regular semester starts to take them.
Yeah, that's a good point. For those of you that may not be familiar, our Master's of Science in Accounting program has been 100% online for over 20 years. So those master's courses we're talking about, you could be a student from anywhere in the country who graduates in December, could go anywhere and finish up those programs. And for the courses that the students are taking ahead of time, in the short run, they have a mix of being, if they're still an undergrad, they have the ability to take some of those graduate courses in person, 1 or 2 of them, but the rest of them are part of our regular master's program. The students who do this, they are curriculum ready to tackle the material. Erin comes to me all the time with amazing stories about our students because she gets to know them all very, very well.
John, can I ask the question? Yeah, it's been great, George and Aaron. I appreciate, and that was very helpful, very educational to me to understand the internship. The one thing I'm not clear on, John, for you is on this bullet point, for the internships, what are we being asked? It's clear on the next couple of bullets what we're considering, but to me, at least, it's not clear what the consideration on this item is.
Actually, it was just to find out what was available and what could be available. since we knew there were some pilot programs out there. And frankly, I was less aware of what you already had for academic internship programs. Now, I don't know what other offerings there are other than UConn, but it's clearly an option that's already there and acceptable, as long as it's tied in with a university program like this.
I think
I'll highlight I'm sorry, Bud. I was just going to highlight, it's also very lucrative for the students, because these are paid. If they're doing it during busy season, they're getting overtime. And with the adjustment that's taking place in accounting salaries, we're seeing now for starting salaries, we're also seeing that, I think Aaron's seeing that as well on the front end in terms of what interns are being offered at the firms we're placing students at. I'm sorry, but I think I may have cut off a question of yours.
No, it was helpful for me. And the only impediment you're describing is there's a cost, like everybody's doing the internship, but some people are not taking advantage of it and getting the credit. But yeah, so I don't know if that's true at other schools, but I understand how it works now at UConn. That's helpful.
Yeah. Sounds like a publicity campaign might be helpful. An information campaign, I'll put it that way instead.
And obviously, Aaron or I'll make Aaron available and myself as well. If you want to talk to us a little bit more about our program, you want to come by and see, just get a better idea of where we are. If you want to talk to me about my perspective relative to other department heads and other schools outside of Connecticut, I'm more than happy to be available to you.
Yeah, I think I would like to take advantage of that sometime.
Could you just clarify on the internships for credit? Is it simply writing a check, or is there more involved in that piece of it?
Well, the first piece of it, I mean, Aaron would jump in as well. The first thing is that we vet what is being done during the internships, and that is to make sure. So it's not a question of you went off and, we have had students. So by and large, our students are going to firms that have established internship programs. We know the extent to which they're going to get education and experience and the like. We will have students come to us, and Aaron will see this every now and then, where someone will come in and say, hey, I have an opportunity to do this at, let's say, a smaller local firm or my next firm. We will vet those individually. We have rejected some because they are much more pedantic than really educational. We do some surveys with the students ahead at the end of it, but by and large, we have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do during those 8 weeks to be able to say, yes, they're getting education, they're getting business exposure, they're getting client exposure, those kinds of things.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else on the board? It's right. I think the difficulty is going to be with the small firms and their ability to get on board to keep the pipeline open. Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I'm gonna take advantage of that pause to get on a very small soapbox today, as opposed to a larger soapbox. Pipeline is something of concern to everyone, and there are clearly a number of factors that have been listed of all of the things that could be discouraging people from doing accounting: the exam, the reputation, the 150, all of these kinds of things. The way I look at this is, for everything you can raise, there are two questions. Like, what's the sign? Is whatever that is, encourage or
You froze, George.
but then the second is you can at least, sorry, somebody didn't want to hear that. I just got cut off for a second. In my opinion, and I would say my peers at universities like us around the country, salary has been the primary factor that has affected the pipeline. At some schools, not at UConn, but I've talked to flagship state universities at other parts of the country, accounting is the lowest paid major. Which, if you think about all the majors out there, but there are some schools out there where, so it's not just a question of it's lower, it's the lowest across all of the disciplines. I think that the change in starting salaries will start to affect that. People will see it a little bit differently. We spend a lot of time talking more about career progress to try to move people just off of that starting salary. It's not where you are now. It's where you'll be in 5, 6, 7 years. Cognizant of the fact that the data says, if I'm looking at 100 students, most of those people will not be in public accounting in 10 years. That's not a bad thing. They're probably in a financial management, or they're on their way to being a CFO. So we're doing a lot more education of the students of accounting being both a profession, being a career path, but also being a foundation for other kinds of work that people can do in the long run. And we bring a lot of alums in who have gone that path. So again, the problem is if you're 18 or 19 years old, the first thing they look at, no matter what their interest might be, is what's my starting salary? And even with the adjustment in starting salaries we're seeing this year, it's going to be 18 months to 2 years before the students who can be affected by that are now declaring themselves to be accounting majors. It's too late for the seniors. It's too late for half of the juniors. So we're really having to see how that will affect us down the road. End of soapbox.
Oh, thank you. Good information. Any other comments? Bud? You're leaning forward, so I thought.
No comment. Thanks,
Okay. Moved on to proposed amendments to UAA Rule 5-7, which I've got to pop on my screen because for some reason when I downloaded this from NASBA's site, it won't print. It's the only thing I wasn't able to print. It just kept doing something to my filter, whatever that is. But has anybody any thoughts to that? What they're looking for is they're looking for comments. Our thoughts revolving that, and I thought that I had no problems with it at all. Anybody like to comment?
My thought was I was supportive of the exposure draft with the 24 months and the other changes.
Anybody else, or should I say anybody that had any heartburn or was not supportive of that exposure draft?
Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
To Bonnie. I got the impression from the material you sent us that you were in favor of a longer time period than 24 months. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. And I have not had a chance to survey every state, but I can tell you of the 25 I've surveyed, only one wants to stay as low as 24. There are 5 that have yet to meet with their own boards of directors, so they have no position at this time, but they're trying quickly to meet so that their board can make a recommendation to their state board. For those that have taken a position and are ready to move forward, I believe there are 19 of my 26, I believe it was. And everyone wants, I'm going to say, a minimum of 36 months. So I'm recommending to you 36 months. Most states are actually recommending 36 months. Some states are already starting to move in that direction. There are a few states that have gone further. And what I mean by going further is they're saying at least 36 months. So they would do a minimum of 36 months. Many of these states are moving forward regardless of what NASBA does, because as Colleen said earlier, it does not impact the substantial equivalency and therefore mobility. The reason why people are looking at the 36 months is the people coming into the profession are different than many that we've had in the past. I think you see that with the workplace. You don't have individuals that are going to figure out how to work the full day, take no time off, take care of their families, to the best that they can, whatever the case may be. When I started working, and when I'm sure many of you did, you didn't have any flexibility. So to be in the workforce, you did whatever you had to do. I started off as a lawyer. I had billable hours. And I had a family that demanded my attention too. And neither one was going to give me any break. So you did what you had to do. I think that was most people. That's not the world now. And therefore, if we don't start to evolve with it, I believe that we will have fewer and fewer people that are willing to go in the profession. So one of the things that was discussed at great length at the meeting that Colleen and I have referenced that took place in Tucson a few weeks ago, every single state anxiety executive that got up asked, why 24 months and why do you have either a limit at all or why not longer? What's the benefit to 24 months? And we were told it's a starting place. So what we heard today has moved a little bit as people continue to have conversations, but it was a starting place because they needed to start somewhere and everyone understood that 18 months just was not sufficient. I would argue that their biggest reason, and I think it was the very first one that NASBA gave today, that they want 24 months is because they don't believe that people will take the test as quickly as they might otherwise if you extended the period. I would tell you based on the data that we've been able to collect so far, and I'd be curious what the state of Connecticut has DCP from their own testing information and therefore you. But we understand that we lose 1,000 to 2,000 people that have passed either 1, 2, or 3 exams every year and then just say enough. Some of those people know enough to come and request an extension so that they have the ability, depending on the circumstances, to have additional time to take their test. So it's done anywhere from, I really think that based on sitting through these meetings now for a number of years, you know better than I do, but it's really anywhere usually from 2 months to 6 months, depending on what's going on in someone's life at any given time. But now, as was said, there's more demands in terms of the busy seasons. The busy seasons are longer, and not everyone's a 3-year busy season like we had a few years ago. People are less willing to not spend any time with their family or go without sleep to study. And therefore, we're losing people, not because they're not interested in the profession, not because they're not bright, but we're putting an, I'm going to call it an artificial barrier up because we feel that they're not responsible enough to take their tests in a timely manner. But what's happening is we're losing more than 1,000 candidates in that testing period, according to those that are dropping, are stopping partway through. They're not finishing it. Now, would I love it if everyone did it in 18 months? Absolutely. But as Colleen said, their I'm going to call it amnesty program for the people that decided to become musicians or whatever during COVID is a one-time fix. If you were to extend the testing period to from 24 months, which is being recommended, to 36 months, I do believe that you would have more people that would be able to have the lifestyle that they're seeking, be able to undertake the exam. And would I still recommend they take it as soon as possible? Absolutely. But that's not life. And we're seeing this with the teacher exams where they have to take the 4 parts as well throughout the country, where not as many as are going after it immediately. So let's not kick them out of the system or encourage them to leave the system. Give them 36 months if everyone's saying it has no negative impact other than some people might take a little longer. That's true. But you'll have some people stay in and take it that would otherwise not. And that's my goal, is to have more people actually complete their CPA exam. You still have to complete it. According to the AICPA, it doesn't mean that the person's any less qualified. The exams don't change that much usually. And you're still requiring them to have the education, to have the experience. So what's the negative other than some people may procrastinate? Again, if that is your big negative, then the positive is you'll have a lot more people based on the polling that's been done that actually finish it. Because the frustration from those individuals that pass those parts of the exam and then have to retake something that they've already showed they're competent in is so frustrating that it turns them off and they exit oftentimes. I went through that last year with a couple of people. I luckily knew about what they were going through and I brought them to the state board, but they weren't going to come here. They weren't going to come and ask. They didn't understand how it worked. I had to coach them through it. And I normally don't do that, but I did it because I had two incredible young women that could bring a lot of life to the profession, that go out and speak to high school kids about how much they like their jobs, et cetera, that were just going to stop seeking their CPA because of a lot of things they'd been through in their life. Luckily well, not luckily because it was a horrific situation, but one woman had a reason that you said, yes, we'll extend it. And the other one was just having a tough time with life, but didn't have a medical reason or a parent killed, So that person didn't get their extension. She's never going to sit again. She said, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing it. I don't need it. There's other places I can go to get paid more. And I can get the same type of money. It sends more people into industry, I would tell you, than would otherwise necessarily go. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of transition now between people that actually may start in industries, initially seek a CPA, go to industry, and now are going back to public, in large part because of advisory services, so outsource CFO, any financial functions. But those people, if they start their CPA and then don't finish it because they decide they're going to go over, they can still go back to the firms later. But again, they're not going back in a position where they need that credential to be able to do the work, but it definitely could help them with their lives because people that get their CPA in general earn $1 million more throughout the lifetime of their career. And hopefully that will increase as wages are increasing for the younger people. But I would tell you, and I apologize, that was a bit rambling. I think that if the big reason why 24 months is what NASBA's pushing right now is procrastination, then that's not an acceptable reason for limiting us to 24 months. When if we extended it to 36, we could capture so many more people. I'm not pushing for the unlimited because I don't agree with that. I do think there needs to be a limit, that the chest does change over time. But I believe that additional time so you can sit for the exam, you can sleep at night, you can spend time with your family is the way of the future. And it's one of the reasons why we're losing kids. But if the firms are starting to make those changes, so they're giving more flexibility, they're allowing remote work, they allow part-time hours for people, they're doing changes, then this is an area where we should, because it's an easy fix. To me, this is a low-lying fruit. I've heard everyone talk about the 150 hours is a better way to go, but I think losing mobility is a big issue. It's not simply a question of where you live. It's also a question of where you can practice. We practice from home now. You don't want to lose your ability or your firm's ability to take on clients from other states or just a variety of things that go on in this world. So like Colleen said, that if you're going to switch anything in those three areas that impact our mobility, it's got to be done together somehow. Yeah. This doesn't have to be, and I would encourage you to recommend to NASBA to go from 24 months to 36 months. And I would encourage you to start that process in Connecticut, because it does take years here, unlike other places. And for us to switch our testing period, there are a couple of sections, which I included in my letter to you, that need to be changed in our state regulations. If you decided later that that's not what should happen, you always have the ability during the process to amend it back. But at least that way you could get public comment on whether the 36 months is of concern to anybody. I've been going around meeting with both students at various college fairs, career fairs, and meeting with managing partners lately. And I have one person, only one person that I heard from yesterday that has said to me, I don't want 36 months. So yes, I do recommend the 36.
Yeah, I've met with several boards in the last 2 weeks that have decided to go with the 24 months as recommendations. I understand the Georgia board is just meeting. They did a survey, had over 1,400 responses. 36% favored 18 months, 44% favored 24 months, 10% favored 36 months, and 10% chose other. I just to share. That meeting was happening concurrently with this. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Bonnie. I already made my comments. I think it's detrimental to the candidates to give them more time. It helps the firms. And I think I'll just leave it there. It helps the firms to let people drag out their exam experience further, but I don't think it helps the candidates.
A couple of things that have changed, though. First of all, Georgia has a huge influx of young people. It's a state that's growing because a lot of people want to live in Atlanta, Savannah, etc. Connecticut doesn't have that luxury, unfortunately. We can claim for the first time, I think this last year and the year before, that we haven't decreased in population, but I don't think we even increased by a full digit, and that's because we had a number of people move from New York City to Connecticut during the COVID crisis. So we have a real problem with declining. I think you're going to see declining population given the fact that we have so many people getting older and passing, to be quite honest. In our own profession, I know that we have huge numbers. The society has a substantial number of our members, a very scary number of our members that are at retirement age now, still working, but for how much longer? We've heard for quite a while, a number of people say, with all this increased technology, or, I'm finally getting to the point where I think I may retire. I would not be surprised if the CTCPA, based on the studies we've done, loses 50% of our membership in the next 10 years. There are not CPAs in the pipeline to fill that. We have a 97% retention rate, by the way, with membership. So it's not that people have a concern with being a member. It's that people are leaving the profession. You combine that with the number of people, the fewer number of people that are actually entering college, the lower number of people that are entering the accounting major, and then of those, again, yet a lower number of people that are sitting for the CPA exam, and that was a drastic drop. That's a concern as well. I think that this is something that's worth moving and trying. And if it turns out that people are waiting until that 36th month to get their last exam every time, then I'd tell you to go in and readjust it. But students now are getting, or candidates now are getting bonuses, not only for passing the CPA exam, for each section of them. And kids care about money. Those are things that didn't happen before. I think that's something that will encourage a lot of people, especially students that are graduating with loans. There's things there to help them as well. I would say that, let's go with whatever's happening across the country. But Connecticut's a bit unique. We are one of the very few states that has not been growing in population, and we tend to lose our students whether or not they graduate from a Connecticut college or simply choose not to return. So a lot of the kids that come here to Connecticut go to school and end up, for example, with one of the big four firms. They'll go to Hartford or Stanford, and they'll go there with the desire to move to either Boston or New York. That happens all the time. We need to think about ways, obviously, to keep people in Connecticut, but we also need to think about how to have more people passing the exam in Connecticut. If you pass it here, you're more likely to stay here. It doesn't mean that you will. But that's a big one. We already know we're so small that we have people that cross the border for tests all the time. It was one of the reasons why you made a modification last year and allowed people to sit after 120 credit hours, because we had the specific example given of two roommates at University of Connecticut, both accounting majors. One was from Massachusetts, the other was from Connecticut. And the one from Massachusetts could sit after 120 hours and actually had start to sit for the exam, while the one in Connecticut had to wait to receive the bachelor's degree, and therefore felt that he was at a disadvantage because he wasn't able to study over the summer and start the CPA, good study, but he wasn't able to start the CPA exam. We already know that we've got some people that take the test in Massachusetts, that seek their license in Rhode Island or New York. Sorry, I'm from the southeast corner, so I think about Rhode Island. Many of you are from Western Connecticut, so I'm going to mention New York. But you actually seek your license in those other states because you can get it after 1 year now. And the kids get that bonus after 1 year now in those other states. They don't in Connecticut. There's different things, and they know what's going on out there. I have to say that I think for a long time, the people at the firms and probably the societies listening to simply management for a while, we're not paying attention to all these factors, but these students know what's going on and what the licensing requirements are from state to state. And I think that it's a disadvantage for us to be an outlier in a negative way, like experience, or if we have an opportunity to become a leader, that we don't take advantage of that. And I would say that the 36 months is something that you will see other states do as well, regardless of what NASBA does. I would like
But
to be in
know that
conformity.
Yeah, her survey is survey of state societies, not state boards. So I do know our CBT admin committee, our D committee, what we hear from them is we don't think you need to go to 24 months, leave it at 18 months. Just so you know, there's a state society position and they're very organized in getting their word out and talking about it. But there is also, from a regulator viewpoint, the state boards are, and they're many are accepting what I'm hearing is let's whatever we're going to do, let's be uniform, because this is something that we're known for in this profession. We're all at 18 months now, right? If you now start having some boards at this and some at that, you are going to start getting jockeying of people from, and it ultimately doesn't help them in the long run, because if they go to one state to get licensed and they can't get reciprocity back, which was the issue that I brought up earlier, you're not helping them either. So I hear, having been to board meetings, something different than what I'm hearing Bonnie sharing from the state society, her state society point of view.
Okay, if I can call stop there. If we have any comments from members of the board, I think we have two issues here. One is that we've got a uniform, a request to opine on a uniform increase from 18 to 24 months. And the second is, which we don't have to which we can give ourselves more time to think about, we do have a state-by-state option to, if we believe that it's appropriate and also meets the requirements of our duties on protection of the public, that we can go past that to 3 years without, presumably at this point, getting into trouble with messing up mobility. So I think we ought to split that. Is that and provide any comments that we might have on NASBA's move from 18 to 24 months. And I will note there that seeing, granted a lot of it was pandemic caused, but seeing the issues that this rolling program can very easily, of one test at a time, can very easily, trip somebody up and in the ability to complete. I would have no problem with moving from 18 to 24 at all. And the question is, which I think that we've heard some very strong arguments for and against on the 36 months, I think we should probably, since that would be a state issue, we're not going to change what's being done nationally, that we should consider that. And we can come back to that put it on the agenda as a specific motion, because we're not going to get a regulation changed or a statute changed in Connecticut between now and our next meeting, or even get one started. So,
But,
is there any other
John, I think
comments?
a third
Please.
option, well, similar
Go-
option is I was on the webinar yesterday that Bonnie was on and Colleen was on, and there were in the chat room, there were some comments around people asking about 36 versus 24, and I think NASBA's recommending strongly that if you are feeling that way, and let's say you're a state board member that was making these comments, that they're thinking about going to 36. So Colleen's saying some are talking 24. It sounds like some may be talking 36. That the recommended path would be, hey, if you feel that way, please respond, to this exposure draft, and tell us, what your preference would be and why, and let's do this together rather than encouraging the states to do them individually. So we could always take a position and write our point of view to NASBA in terms of whether we agree that 24 is the right number or if 36 might be, in our view, a better option.
Okay. How many others feel that 36 would be a better option, at least for us, and we could recommend to NASPA that they consider that instead of 24? One, two, three. I see Stacy vigorously shaking her head no. Okay, Stacy, you want to make a comment on that?
Well, I don't personally see the point of it. If they can take the exam as, what is it, every month now, or 2 months out of every quarter. So they presumably could take every section 4.5 times in that time period. I mean, frankly, if you can't pass it in that amount of time, we don't really need you in the profession if it takes that much effort. Most firms now, to Bonnie's point, are offering incentives to pass it. So if they're going to go to another state to pass it in a year, why aren't they doing that here? Why are we giving them 3 years to pass an exam that they want to be considered a qualified candidate after 1 year? I don't see how those two correlate.
Anybody would like to respond to that from the board?
I know I'm not on the board. Can I say one quick thing?
You may.
I'm wondering if there's any data on, this new exam, that discipline section that people are going to select. They're kind of muddling down in terms of, if there's, say, 300 people that are going to take a discipline, they're going to take different disciplines. I believe it's going to take them longer to get their scores for those sections. And if we're seeing less and less people taking the CPA in general and then taking lower numbers in those disciplines, I don't know how quickly people are going to be turning through them. I don't have a comment between 24 and 36. That's not my place. I would just be curious to see, based on the data, of how many people take longer to take the exam, or how long they wait between taking sections that they failed. If there's some little predictive scenario you could do in terms of timeline of how long it would actually take someone to finish based on when they're going to get scores from the new discipline.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that any of us know that yet, because those exams aren't until next year. I'm speaking solely on the existing exam. So maybe this isn't even a conversation for now. I know we're talking about it now because of the way Connecticut is so slow. But perhaps we can get more information on what the expectation is for the new exam and the scoring, because obviously when the CPA exam first went electronic, it was ridiculously slow to get exam scores, even though BEC was all multiple choice. There were no simulations, but we still had to wait 2 months to get our scores. I know it's improved, but it's still pretty slow given the fact that there are multiple choice. You know, I've had people comment to me that it'd be nice if they could leave the exam with at least the multiple choice piece graded, since there's no subjectivity to that. I don't, you know, I don't know on the new exam, the first year might take 3 months to get scores. So to your point, yes, that would need a longer exam window. So I don't know, Colleen, if you can speak to that to give us a little more
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, this information was actually shared at the annual meeting in late October, but the score release dates and the testing periods are already out for 2024. They're not final, but we wanted to get them out and share them. And there are going to be some score delays, but everybody will be able to test at least once in a quarter. And there was a policy that all of the state boards have passed. Maine still has to finish it up, but where candidates with credits on 1/1/24 are going to get an extension of 18 months through June 30th of 25. So that is the nod to that specific issue. There's already leniency been granted for that.
Does anybody else want to make some comments? I think perhaps we should get a motion on the table. We've got, and I do understand Colleen's point that it always seems like when you extend it, everybody extends because people are natural procrastinators. I also remember all the difficulty it seemed to have when we didn't seem to. But anyway, I'll stop talking. Does anybody have a motion they would like to forward? Carla?
I have a comment.
Yes.
It seems like the board is divided so that any motion that we would make at this point needs to be somewhat flexible. I mean, I personally think obviously we want to go to 24 months from 18. And I'm not sure there's any division on the board about that concept. The question is whether we as a board feel like recommending consideration of an extension of the timeline to 36 months instead. And I just wanted to get some sort of sense of the group before there's a motion made about how that concept to go with 24, to endorse extension to 24 months, but recommend further consideration of 36.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah,
Carla, I'm okay with that's what my position would be.
Yeah, I would be okay with that too,
Same.
because I do recognize the state has some significant, I mean, it's not just in accountants. We've got issues with availability of people that it's not going to be solved by extending it, but perhaps limiting it makes it more difficult to resolve. So, well, as everybody knows, I can't make a motion, so I'll entertain a motion. Carla.
Okay, I'll take a stab at the motion. I move that we send a communication to NASBA, that we as a board send a communication to NASBA that endorses the extension of the timeline from 18 to 24 months, but recommend further consideration of a further extension to 36 months.
We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and now's the time for any further discussion.
Sorry, who seconded that?
Well, both Bud and Daniel did.
Okay, thank you.
So, did you have a comment, Tim?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, then, all in favor, please say aye, and since we're not there, just raise your hand also.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I don't believe there's anybody left. Okay, and we can also bring up the understanding we do also ultimately have the flexibility for the 36 months. I like this, personally like this motion. But I don't know, it seems like the times have changed. It's more difficult, the people's schedules, and it's not just their druthers. So, okay, 2-year experience requirement for obtaining a CPA certificate. We've gone over 2 hours. I don't know whether anybody wants to pick this up or move that to the next scheduled meeting.
I think we could handle it quickly, John, right? I don't know. Is there a lot of debate on that one?
All in favor? Okay. Let's roll. I mean, what should it be?
Yeah.
I mean, I think our issue with the experience requirement was never so much the length, but sometimes the restrictions for those people that weren't in public accounting, which we have not changed.
I thought that was changed to be as long as you were under a supervising CPA in private.
No. The issue was before you were on the board was that it was difficult for somebody how they got that supervision under a CPA when they were used under some of the large private industries, and we did not change that. It still had to remain under the supervision of a CPA fully.
So that's still in effect now.
That is still in effect, yes.
Interesting. Okay.
We are at 2 years now, aren't we? Says he. Yes.
Just want everyone to know, I looked up quickly whether or not we were, and I didn't think we were based on that discussion regarding the travelers and other programs. But
Right.
for experience, we are one of those states that it's not bookkeeping in the back room. We spell out specifically the hours that have to be spent in each area.
As far as what you have to do in private to get there, we are one of the more strict states.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can you just tell us in a few words exactly what the proposed change is, just to make sure we're all on the same page?
I said Bonnie's leaning forward. She really wants to pitch in here. Go ahead.
All right. I'm looking for Connecticut to get in line with the other 41 states and reduce our experience requirement from 2 years to 1 year. So the proposal would be to reduce Connecticut's experience requirement from 2 years to 1 year.
Well, I'm going to lean on those people that are currently in public practice here, or more recently than I. So Bud and Tim, you still apply here, and Pete. God, we've got a lot of recent retirees. Is 1 year sufficient? One busy season? And
I
Colleen's
have
not here,
people
so
that are 2-3 years that still aren't. So it's,
Pretty
I,
much.
well, some of
I
them will
would,
never be.
I mean, honestly, I think it would be wonderful if we could go back to the way it was where it's either 150 hours or 2 years of experience, because we have people, a lot of firms that I know of are hiring people right out of school after they've completed their 4 years. And, you know, maybe it's an intern from last year and we've hired them to start this year. They're working as paraprofessionals and we can't call them entry-level staff until they get that extra 30 hours, but they're working and getting experience. So to get to 2 years of experience is easy. But in my opinion, it should be one or the other, because the experience is where you're getting the basis for becoming a CPA. The 3 years of basket weaving and sports nutrition is not.
Tell us how you really feel.
It's just, I see it. I mean, the experience is how you learn. The classwork is not.
Okay, I think we all recognize the need for experience. The question is, how much? How long?
I don't think a year is enough.
There's one. Anybody taking the alternative?
I have to agree with Stacy. I'm struggling with this. I don't, from what I see in practice, a year is not enough. It's definitely not enough.
Pete?
5 years?
Excuse me?
5 years?
Said 5 years.
Tim?
I mean, I agree with, I don't know that even 2 years is enough experience, but I guess the other practical matter of it is that the other states having the 1 year, I don't fully comprehend how that's affecting our supply of qualified candidates, I guess.
I think it's the education requirement. People aren't going into accounting because they don't want to spend the money on an extra year of schooling. I remember when that requirement started and immediately there was a drop in accounting majors.
Yeah, we dropped from interviewing by a factor of 2/3 1 year to the next.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
But having said that, yeah.
Yeah, I
that was
struggle
also a
to
boom year for
understand why we
finance.
did that.
But just going back is a pipeline is a quality feature for the profession, which means it does affect our main goal, which is the protection of the public and the financial system, et cetera. But on the other hand, you don't, if you need more than 1 year of experience for the quality to hold yourself out as a CPA, then you're giving up more protection than you are gaining on the other side.
Yeah.
Carla.
I just have a question because we've gone through so many issues today. Are internships counted as experience? If you're an intern in a firm, like in the summertime before you graduate from undergraduate school?
I know it used to.
Used to, yeah.
Well, that's what
we always considered it that way because they were working out on audit teams.
Yeah, I mean, they're treated as entry-level staff. So I'll give you an example. I have somebody who's here now. He was an intern for me last summer. He is back as an intern during busy season. If he then comes to work for us full time, he is already work the equivalent of 4 to 6 months, I would think that should count towards his year or 2 years of experience.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I add what the law says?
Oh,
You
yeah.
may. Of
Oh,
course.
please.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, well, it depends on how you define the internship. Right now, the regulations state that it has to be full-time employment. And so, it depends. Yeah, so it has to be full-time employment.
What
That means you have to get paid.
Yeah,
well,
they
yeah,
get paid.
we
Oh,
always
they get
paid
paid.
interns, and
Yeah.
they were paid as staff, and they were working full time during that period.
Yeah.
Right, so so internships to count as education needs to be reflected in the transcript. But to count as experience, it needs to be full-time. The regulation is quite detailed, and that's just one aspect of it, full-time relationship, but I can forward you the section of the regulation later if you like, but there's more to it than that.
Thank you. So there's a pregnant pause. How many states are, when did this thing start to move down to 1 year? And how many states are doing this? Unfortunately, Colleen's not still on. She'd probably have it at the top of her head.
In the letter I sent to everyone, I actually included the NASBA chart. There
Yeah.
are 41 states that only have the 1 year requirement. Indiana's about to reduce theirs from 2 years to 1 year. So in a matter of weeks, it'll be 42 states. And it happened when they went to 150. It was determined that at 150, you only needed one. Kind of getting back to what Stacy said. If you have 120, you had 2 hours. If you have 150, you have 1 hour. And so the states nobody sought repeal of that. None of the states that have passed that have sought repeal. There's actually more if you include the jurisdictions, but I'm not. I'm just using the United States.
So basically, everybody's saying that because we're all at 150, we're going to go, well, except for some rogue states that want to go back down, we're going to go to 1 year.
Everyone other, I can't say, I know, yes, they're all at 1 year. And when when Minnesota did put out their proposal that Colleen mentioned earlier, 2 of those 3 pathways they proposed were 150 at 1 year, 120 at 2 years.
And the fact is, with our other conversation, very few people are going to get the exam within that 1 year anyway.
Yeah.
Who's going to do that? So it's almost, I mean, part of me says that if somebody after 1 year can get CPA on their card, that's fine, CPA, and to go out and hold themselves out independently as a CPA, they probably don't have enough experience. But that's just my personal opinion. And I don't see anything that we gain by being an outlier, particularly unsubstantial equivalency, and holding out on 2 years and by the time we get this done, it's going to be 49 to 1 anyway. Because it's faster to get a statute changed, but it's not fast, and it's already too late for this legislative season, even to get anything considered. So we do have time on this, but not that much time, because I remember you've got to get it in for the legislative season by September to make sure it's on the calendar. So we need to do that within one way or another within this next by the next meeting, maybe
When is
one
our
more.
next meeting? June,
May 9th.
May 9th.
Yeah.
Could we maybe give ourselves a little more time to think about this item and vote on it at the next meeting, or are you recommending we do it now?
Well, I think it won't make any difference whether if we defer and give ourselves more time.
Yeah.
And I'd like to give it some thought because I'm sitting here saying, yeah, I think you need more time, but you got a bunch of states with inflow and no problems, and who have felt that no, it's with 150 hours and the educational requirements, and frankly, it's not going to affect that many people with the time it takes for most people to get through the exam. That going down to one would certainly not endanger the public by any means. Yes, Carla.
Can I move to table this issue till our next regular meeting?
You may move whatever you wish.
Oh, so moved.
I'll
Would
second
anybody
that.
like to second that?
I will.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. It's so moved. I have a feeling it's probably going to pass. When we come back, but I'll get back into that chart and see what everybody's doing and go forward. Now, we do have our last item for comments and concerns of any person present today. If any of our those people listening have said, but you didn't do this, or I want you to put this, consider this for next agenda, this is your time. Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
This is Pete. I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for hanging in so long, everybody, particularly those of us who are not retired.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.
There it is.